Thank you. I'm Laura Millin, Director of the museum, and I, again, welcome you. And I would like to introduce our moderator tonight, Ginny Merriam, Communications Director for the City of Missoula.
Thank you, Laura. We're experimenting with, should we be standing up?
Yes.
Or should we be sitting down? You want us to stand up? We're aiming for a little bit of a casual discussion here, but I don't know. We'll do both. We'll hop up and down. I'm going to introduce to you Leslie Van Stavern Millard III.
Second.
Long time Missoula artist, shepherd of the Brunswick building and its gallery. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about the show that is up now.
First off, I'd like to reintroduce Ginny Merriam, whose idea was the panel. Originally, I was going to ask Laura and Andrea to talk, like give speeches, and she said, I've got a better idea, let's do a panel. So this is really a result of her, so it's no surprise that she is the communication director in Missoula, and for the mayor, Mayor Andrea Davis. She's also a graduate of the University of Montana's Journalism School, and she was formerly a long-term Missoulian reporter, journalist, and her first beat was being the arts, covering the arts. And that's probably where I met her, either in opening or through the articles, very, very excellent articles that she wrote. So, yeah. I don't want to talk long, and so I'm going to give you a really short reason for why this came about. If you ask my husband, one of the main things I'd like to know is why. So the why is that when I was 20 in 1970, I had just declared an interdepartmental major of studio art and biology at Mount Holyoke College, which is a women's college. And my parents were living in Tripoli, Libya. Gaddafi had formed his coup in Libya the previous summer while we were living there. So I came back in the summer of 1970 with my art supplies. I planned to make art while I was visiting them, but I also needed to make money. And so there was very few circumstances open to a young white woman in the city, and I started babysitting for a diplomatic family that were probably in their 30s or 40s, Americans. And they had an artist in their family that I had not met, but they knew I was a young, aspiring artist, so they talked to me about art. They showed me the art in their home. And at one point, the husband, who was the diplomat, said, do you realize what's going on in Egypt? And I'm like, this is pre-internet, pre-international. It was like, the only thing you would ever learn is by reading a newspaper, which in Libya was very limited. So he said, I'm going to give you some papers. So he gave me a paper that he had received probably confidentially or as part of his work, and it was about artists in Egypt being suppressed. But they weren't allowed to sell their work, they weren't allowed to decide what they wanted to do. It was a lot of suppression, and I had never heard that something like that could happen. It was a big eye-opener to me. And so fast forward a couple of months later, and I'm leaving Libya, and I've made art during the summer, and I had 2 or 3 pieces I was bringing back with me. And when we got to the airport, they not only checked stuff that came into the country, but they checked stuff going out of the country. And so they opened my suitcase and they very deliberately damaged one of my pieces of art, which, in the world of things, it was not significant, but the impact was significant to me that somebody there that I had no recourse. We were leaving, no one would have listened to me. There was a lot of anti-American sentiment at that time. So I came back to school, 1970, if any of you remember. It's very open, a lot of free expression, lots of creativity, no limits. And so I kind of forgot that that had happened, but I think that it informed a lot of my subsequent decisions about trying to stretch the limits of what we're allowed to do and my concern. And really, literally, none of my compatriots talked about it. It just wasn't part of the formula. So we fast forward to 2017 with Trump having been elected in 2016. And I became very, very concerned, and in conversations with my artist friends, they were concerned at what this meant. And so 9 of us got together and decided we would have a show at the Brunswick Gallery titled We the People. It was quite cooperative. Everybody had 3 or 4 pieces. It was very powerful, and we got good coverage for it and good attendance. So now we move into 2023, and I found out that my college is, the Alumni Association in Germany is hosting a symposium on the arts and democracy right at the beginning of November. And I am going to be one of the presenters there, which I'm really thrilled about, and I felt it was appropriate. And I realized that most of the people that are in the symposium are very high-level academics, so it's going to be really kind of art history and a lot of talking. At the time I engaged with them in the spring, they had only one other actual visual artist. So now they have more, but it prompted me at that time, I'm like, it's nice to analyze that stuff, but the visual artists are on the ground and their concerns are very different than the people that are analyzing this. Oh, anyway, I decided I wanted to have a repeat, upgraded version of We the People here that I could present before our election in the hopes that it would have some positive effect on the outcome. And that's what is going on now. So at the Brunswick, but as opposed to the smaller group, all of whom are in this show. Originally, I thought I would ask those people and maybe have 2 or 3 more, and it would be 10 or 12. Well, then it was 14, and then it was 18, and now it's 28 people. And seriously, if I had not just decided that I couldn't do anymore, the room's pretty small, it would be 50 people. And out of those 28 people, I only asked one person that turned me down, and it was for family circumstances. And of that 28, 4 originally said, no, I can't do it. I've got too many professional obligations. I'm not going to, I'll pass. They all came back. And one artist went so far as to call me a week before the show and said, I'm flying in from Portland to bring my piece to the gallery the day before. And I was like, okay, fine. I've been bad myself. I'm very bad at deadlines, so I have to have some degree of latitude. Anyway, I'm just telling you that there is a very strong passion in the art community about the issues that are going on. I didn't censor anyone's entry. I pretty much said, I don't care if it's new, I don't care if it's old, I don't care if it's for sale, I don't care if you want to sell it. It's all of that is okay. I wasn't worried about the marketing aspect because we're not a regular gallery and it's not sales oriented, but what people did is they had a lot of latitude. A lot of people dropped everything and worked because most people didn't know until the past 2 months. So I just want to conclude with that. I did apply for a grant from the Montana Arts Council, a strategic investment grant, which they gave us because I needed to employ people to sit the gallery and postcards and the infrastructure. So I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate the Missoula Art Museum for being such a strong part of the art community and hosting it. And Laura has been a good friend, and I have to say, part of the reason I turned to her and to the museum is that in the past, we have marched for the arts and government, and with Tester 10 or 15 years ago when he did a platform like that, so I knew that she would be stalwart about that. I also want to thank Christy Hager, who was very supportive when I was making decisions about how to do this. And lastly, my husband, Max Gilliam, who when I first thought I would think, I was like thinking about this in May and we're way too busy. And I said, maybe I should do an updated version. And he said, do it. Go ahead. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm going to introduce our panelists to you so you know who they are. And we'll have a little discussion with some questions, and I'm hoping we'll have a little bit of time left at the end for questions from you. So at the end, we have Krys Holmes, who is the new Executive Director of the Montana Arts Council. Krys has worked in the arts in Montana and at large for more than 30 years, amassing a wealth of expertise about the state's history, culture, and heritage. During that time, she's held a number of diverse roles as a writer, communications professional, accountant, and director of both the Myrna Loy and the Holter Museum of Art in Helena. Many thanks to Krys for changing her schedule to be able to be with us today. Laura Millin, some of you may know. Laura has been at the helm of the Missoula Art Museum for more than 30 years. Is that true? 35. Okay. I think I wrote the story about you becoming the new director of the Art Museum. But we're old.
You did.
Under her leadership, the
Amazing.
museum has blossomed into a source of inspiration for Montana artists and patrons. She has been a fierce advocate on behalf of artists' rights, freedom of expression, and democratic values. Laura graduated from Evergreen State College with a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies. Her support for the We the People exhibit and her generosity and that of her staff have facilitated this panel tonight. Andrea Davis is the mayor of Missoula. She grew up in Kalispell and has called Missoula home since 1998, when she came to the University of Montana to study organizational communications and environmental studies. She has dedicated her 22-year career to building sustainable homes and strong communities. For the past 15 years, before she came to the city, she served as the executive director of Homeward, where she built thousands of homes that Montanans can afford across 14 communities. She has also served on multiple boards. She was elected mayor last November. Mae Nan Ellingson, to my left, moved to Missoula in 1967, received her BA in political science with honors from the University of Montana, as well as earning her law degree. She was the youngest delegate at the 1972 Constitutional Convention from Missoula. As a longtime partner at Dorsey Whitney, she specialized in areas of law requiring knowledge of constitutional state, local government, and federal tax law. For Mae Nan, it meant working on great public projects, schools, sewer systems, libraries, swimming pools, and fire trucks, from which our community has greatly benefited. That is all true. She is also a philanthropist, serving on several boards and applying her intelligence and support to many organizations, such as the Missoula Art Museum. So this is who's talking. I'm finding it weirdly awkward to stand up like this when, I don't know, but stand or sit at will.
Okay.
We're going to start with a super easy question
Good.
for all of you. What are the roles of the arts in a democracy? Sorry, super easy. We have two mics to share here.
Okay.
As the voice of the Montana Arts Council, I'm happy to pave this way, and you all can clean up after me. Art is the expression and the embodiment of freedom. A democracy is based on the freedom of the individual and the freedom in a society to operate well as its participants so decide. Artists, as our friend and epic Congressman Pat Williams often said, artists have an intimate relationship with freedom, because you, as an artist, you have to go to that place of freedom that allows for questioning, exploration, experimentation, sometimes failure, rethinking, deeper thinking, as a part of the process of becoming a more well-rounded human in a more vibrant society. And I think the act of democracy, the art of democracy, the act of participating in the arts, as well as philosophy and religion, require that kind of freedom and constant questioning and re-examination, the freedom to move around in your own independent exploration and societal exploration of what does it mean to be us in this place and time. If art or government or anything provides an answer that we all align behind, that's not art, that's propaganda. That's not democracy, that's tyranny. It's the freedom to question. It's the freedom to experiment and discover and deepen ourselves. So to me, art and democracy are completely intertwined.
Very good. Good lead on.
Here at MAM, we believe that arts generate dialogue, raise awareness, and really ultimately change the world around us and how we see it. And, you know, it is, by the way, a fundamental right. Artistic expression, free expression is protected in the First Amendment of our Constitution. And so, you know, we practice that. That's our job, to practice it and defend artists in that way. And I think especially when we're in such divisive times, it's more important than ever.
Yes. All right, let's add to this. Thank you both for that. You know, what has come to mind after hearing both of you was a time that I was in Washington, D.C., and there was this place called the museum there. Did anybody go?
Yes.
It was such a cool place. I am heartbroken that it's closed.
Yeah.
And while there, and tying in, I think, to some, you know, work of this group up here, I remember seeing a piece of the Berlin Wall. That was a large piece of the Berlin Wall. And there was this beautiful piece of graffiti art that said, "Act Up." And art in democracy has such a prominent role, both overtly and sometimes subvertly, depending on the circumstances, and how both artists are helping connect with the community, also in some cases working to help people survive in a situation of tyranny, and then helping spark creativity for folks to yet build a better democracy. I mean, I think your point is so well taken in that we make democracy is this work of art in and of itself, because it's this interactive, growing and changing place that we come together to try to make a better community together. And art is a place of also creating, and sometimes it's pushing people, sometimes it is calming people, sometimes, you know, it is saying the thing that nobody else can say. And so having the ability for that freedom, it's right on, it's so essential. And it seems like art really is at the heart of democracy in so many ways.
Mae Nan says she's passing on that one because we have a big one for her later. The diversity of expression that we see in this show that is at the Brunswick and elsewhere is a hallmark of the arts and democracies. How do community and institutional leaders, such as yourselves, foster that diversity, both political and social?
Everything, you guys.
Can we hear that question one more time?
Yeah, I'm not focusing on it.
Focus.
Okay.
The diversity of expression we see in this show at the Brunswick now and elsewhere is a hallmark of the arts in democracies. Arts and democracies, we see diversity. How do community and institutional leaders like yourselves foster that diversity, both political and social? So maybe not just in the art, but in the artists.
You lived, all right? You went close. Oh, sorry.
Well, I think it's to create diversity and, is part of what we call inclusion and is an intentional aspect of our work here at MAM. I think I read that, artistic expression is the intersection of human rights and art. And I think that that's really interesting to think about. And so when I assume when you're suggesting diversity, you're also suggesting a broad range of expression and, daring to go into controversial and difficult or provocative issues. And, this needs to be backed up by communication and I think needs to be part of a dialogue with intentional inclusion. So I wanted to point out that at the We the People show, there's Leslie worked hard to get each of the artists to submit a statement. So there's that communication, so that viewers can come and understand. When provoked by one of those pieces, or agitated, or just interested in one of those pieces, there's the communication to back it up. Here at MAM, we work hard on that level of communication, and that you have all experienced that with our exhibits, and ask the same of the artists. Then you need to be ready for whatever comes back at you, criticism, different points of view. Protecting free speech is a complicated thing because we have to accept everything that comes with that. Even hate speech is protected by our Constitution. And of course, we don't encourage it or nurture it. And we work hard to protect artists in particular. But listening is the key. Listening and creating dialogue. Again, if I know this will happen at the Brunswick, it happens here at MAM all the time. People come in and see work that is provocative and they don't always understand, or they're not always ready for it, and they don't necessarily agree, but we've got to be ready for the conversation. We had a wonderful experience with the Body Politics show. I don't know how many of you got to see it, but it was a very provocative show. And but the artists worked hard to communicate their intention for exploring tough topics like misogyny and male domination and patriarchy and the effect of that on the female body. And so, one of the things they did, one of their strategies was to make prints to give away. And it kind of invited the audience to be a part of their expression. If you agree with them, you have to take a piece home. And one of the pieces was just enough. And we gave away hundreds of them to all kinds of people, male, female, young and old, and who all said, yeah, enough is enough. So it was a really brilliant thing. And I applaud Christy Hager, who, after seeing the Body Politics show, she made her own pad of prints you'll see at the Brunswick, and you can take a Christy Hager home. So I think it's all about being open to that exchange and dialogue, because that's the only way we can change minds. Please.
Thank you for that. So I feel like in talking about art and freedom, we have to acknowledge that there is not just freedom of expression, but that each of us have sovereignty over our own experience of the work of art. No one can tell us how to interpret a work of art or take it in, and the artist takes that huge risk in this realm of freedom in putting their artwork out there and taking the chance that it is going to be interpreted completely differently than their intent, or possibly misinterpreted. And there are stories all over about, people getting outraged about a work of art that they don't necessarily take the time to understand, or they want a book removed from the library that they haven't necessarily read because it disturbs them too much, or the idea of it disturbs them so much they can't get too close to that work of art. And that's an important aspect of freedom as well, is giving everyone, acknowledging that we all have the right to interpret a work of art as we will, and being willing, hopefully, to enter into that space of communication and broader understanding. Because what the business really is that we are about is realizing our fullness as a society. And that's how I look at diversity. Back to your question about diversity, I don't necessarily look at diversity of race or culture or certain categories of people or works of art, as much as I look for diversity in what kinds of questions are you asking, what kinds of stories are you telling, what challenges are you bringing to me that I wouldn't get any other way. And in that, the voices of the marginalized, the voices that have been willfully silenced, have the greatest chance of expanding my fullness as a human. So that is how I personally look at diversity in artwork and in our society, and I think we need to pay attention to that always.
Wow. I don't really know how to follow those two up, except for this story, Ginny, and you'll appreciate this since we talk about this quite a bit in the MO. That's the mayor's office. Something that may bridge actually a lot of what you'll talk about, Mae Nan. I think about the art of expression, and something that occurred before I was the mayor, but I hear about these stories now and some of the things that some challenging issues that we manage on the daily in our office around, are you getting as many negative emails about this as you did about that? And that thing is the naked bike ride. And many of you will remember that. And that is art of expression. And folks, when that activity came forward to the city, and the city attorney at the time determined that there was no way the city could not stop this, that there was a permit, and there were things in which the city could do to make sure that it was manageable for people who might not want to be exposed to people's naked body parts. But at the same time, this was a thing that was going to go forward. And so you have an institution, a local government, that despite receiving an enormous amount of pressure from the public, and a mayor at the time, our late great John Engen, who evaluated the situation, and together with partners like Ginny, said this will proceed forward. And that expression and what that meant for the people that were willing to participate in performative art, really, it's performance, that was something that constitutionally was guaranteed to be able to express that. And so when you think about an institution, a community organization, a government, what kind of roles do we have? There are many, and in some ways it's guaranteeing the ability to participate.
Yep, that's right. Right on.
I have to admit, that's the first time I've thought of the naked bike ride as artistic expression. It was billed more as an athletic event, but it was kind of both.
Well, what about freedom?
Freedom, yeah, right, that's it, yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
There was some body painting there.
Now,
Not that I was writing or anything, but.
no. To be clear, Mayor Engen also did not participate. This art show contains work that is overtly political, for those of you who have seen it. For instance, in one, a present-day political figure's head appears in a painting, very obviously who it is. And other work aims at more subtle political references. Leslie and I thought about, is one or the other of those more powerful for you, or do you think for others?
Do you want to say anything? No? For me, neither one is more powerful. It depends on the situation. Where am I at in the space? What is, for this particular show, what is the message or the connection that's being portrayed? So for me, sometimes the subtlety that when I stand in front of a piece of art, before I read an artist statement, I find that so interesting to have my first experience with a piece of art and contemplation and interpretation. And then I read the artist statement, and then I have this whole other level of experience that helps me understand their perspective of, and so for me, both can be just wonderful, and I don't think one or the other is more powerful for me.
I agree with that.
I would say I would agree with that as well. I think the pieces of art that ask a question or that ask questions are more enduring, but the pieces of art that make a statement about this moment and this time are really powerful in the moment, whether they endure as a long-lived, enduring image in the public consciousness or not. They are very powerful for right now. So they each have their own place, and they each are really important.
I'd like to say something. Yeah. So I may have mentioned that I did not jury what people gave me. They had totally free will. And so I was really impressed to see the range of response to essentially the title. I didn't give them a treatise that they had to read and report on. And so it was fascinating that some are very specific to issues and yet still not really blatant. And others are very blatant and almost like, and then things are like haiku. So that to me was interesting. And if I had asked 100 artists and 100 artists had responded, I think we would have had even more diversity, which as an artist, I think it's fascinating because that's what art does. It allows that kind of individual expression and opportunity to flourish. So that in itself is a product of a democracy. Yeah.
That is interesting. Okay, we have a special question for Mae Nan, the attorney. Share your thoughts with us, please, on the First and Seventh Amendments to the Constitution and the court decisions recognizing artistic expression and speech. What is the importance of the judiciary on both the state and federal levels?
I'd like to stand up to the rest of the area. Thank you. And I'm so thankful for being asked to participate in this We the People panel because those are the opening words of my two most favorite documents, the Constitution of Montana and the Constitution of the United States. I think it's so, we are all of us are here assuming that we have an unfettered right of art as being protected by both those constitutions. And I would just like to give a little bit of history and as well as a little bit of a warning as we proceed into this election year. First of all, neither constitution makes any reference to art. The federal constitution talks about the government may not abridge freedom of speech or press. The Montana Constitution went a little bit further and talked about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, a much broader definition, a much broader level of protections, I should say. It's interesting to note, or it's obvious if I say that it's not written into the constitutions, how did we come to have what we think is the right of artistic expression under both constitutions? Court interpretation, Supreme Court interpretation. So we take this for granted because it's been about 100 years that the court has recognized artistic expression as protected by the First Amendment. But what I think you'll be really interested in knowing is the historic ramifications of that. It was critical even to the U.S. Supreme Court in looking at art questions under the First Amendment. Was a painting expressing something? Was it expressing an idea? Was it expressing an intellectual question? Interestingly enough, art for art's sake early on was not given protection under the First Amendment. And I think most of us would kind of think now that art becoming political is questionable. But it was the political art that the courts first recognized as having protection under the First Amendment. It kind of started in a case involving a magazine in 1916, I believe it was called The Masses. And it was a progressive magazine devoted both to politics and art. And artists of all kinds were able to submit art, and authors and journalists submitted all kinds of polemics or opinions or poems. And what happened was in the dissemination or the delivery of this magazine, the Postmaster General looked at some of the pictures in this magazine, and he went back and he looked at a code book, and he concluded that this was obscene, or some of the art was obscene. So there was litigation surrounding that. What happened as a result of this is the magazine didn't go under, but what the magazine editors decided that under a little precedent before, in order for art to be protected, it had to express an idea. So the editors of the magazine started captioning the art to say what, and they were reading into the artist's work what they thought it meant. So then it became protected. Well, the artists were furious, and it led to an artist strike in 1916 because they wanted their art to be protected whether or not it expressed a political idea. But they didn't prevail. Truly, art, the original protection of artistic expression had to do, did it express an idea? And it might be interesting to note that to me, one of the more interesting cases involved a sculptor named Richard Serra, who had an art piece removed from a public space, and I think it was in New York, but I'm not totally sure. But it was removed from a public space, and he challenged the removal of that on the basis of the First Amendment,
It was a federal building.
the federal building, and he lost. He lost because the court said that sculpture didn't represent an idea. It didn't represent an idea. So when you think about this, if you look at the history of our jurisprudence on the First Amendment, a Monet might not be considered art because historically it would maybe be hard to read into a Monet a political position. So rest assured that I think the more political the art is, the greater protection it's going to have. Now, of course, there are exceptions. 2 points I want to make. Even in this evolution of recognizing art, having artistic expression, having value under the First Amendment or being protected, there are still 2 standards of art. Artistic speech is still not yet accorded the same protections that written speech is. And a lot of commentary, people making comment about this, hope that it will be. But it still is not accorded, when you look through cases, it still is not accorded the same level of scrutiny that if you were trying to censor or ban written work. A couple of other points that I think are important. In Montana, we've had very few cases challenging or first of all, raising the question under our Constitution. Initially, a sort of interesting result, and Ginny, or Andrea, I think you'll be interested in this. It involved a male dancer in Butte, and in Billings, and he apparently wore a raincoat on stage, and he had something called a Groucho Marx bikini, which I don't know exactly what that is, but he was
Later.
what?
I'll tell you later.
He was dancing, and you know, it was kind of a cabaret type environment, and nobody said it was really obscene or pornographic because we know that obscenity is not protected by the First Amendment. And we know by definition obscenity is writing or art that has no artistic value. That's basically the definition. Well, the guy was arrested anyway, and he claimed First Amendment freedom for freedom of expression. And our Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court, and this is after our Constitution was enacted, the 1972 Constitution, was found guilty. He appealed to the Montana Supreme Court. The court upheld his conviction. And interestingly enough, they upheld his conviction based on another amendment to the Constitution, which gives the police power to the local governments. And so Billings had an ordinance against erotic dancing in a bar. And so they upheld this infraction, or upheld his dancing because of the city's police power to prohibit it. So I think that's a really interesting case under the Montana Supreme Court. There's so many things I want to tell you, and I don't want to hog up too much time, but I just want to talk about a couple of other things very quickly. I think we're going to see, well, we have seen changes, of course, over time, what art is, what speech is, what methods of speech are protected. And the courts have always recognized that even artistic expression can be curtailed in certain circumstances. Censorship is different, and I think you will what?
Speak to that, yeah.
Yeah, speak to that. The federal government nor the state government have to allow the display of all art in all buildings. They do have to allow it in public arenas, in arenas that are designed for public discourse. So that goes back to this notion of freedom of expression, freedom of speech. You're at a place where all public is being gathered in order to hear or see. So they cannot do that, but they do not have to fund it. They do not have to allow it in a museum. The legislatures can decide not to fund the NEA. They can decide not to fund the Montana Arts Council. So it's important, I make these points for two reasons. It's important to recognize that there are things at play in the protection of art other than the constitutions. And one of them is legislative action, finances, and so on. And then the other is the judiciary and how it interprets the law. As we know, we pretty much assumed that Roe versus Wade was the law of the land. And all of a sudden, it isn't. Courts can make decisions, and we know that they are not totally bound by precedent. It would be very hard, in my opinion, to go back to where we are not recognizing artistic expression as protected by the First Amendment. But there can be gradations and determinations as to what constitutes artistic expression. Political art, yes, but the most recent example, I think, that's come before the public in Montana is this last legislative session enacted a law that bans drag performances in public schools, going so far as to determine that the state can withdraw funding from a public school if it allows a drag performance in a public school. That law has been challenged for its constitutionality under the federal constitution, not under the state constitution. So there's a ban, there's an enforcement ban against it now, pending further litigation. I think I better yield this, but there's a lot more to say.
No, it's very interesting things to think about for our times and previously. I've got, are you all up for one more question and then maybe a few questions from the audience? Oh, you want to jump in on that one?
Real briefly?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mae Nan. That's very interesting. I think that I just feel, that it would be important to talk about what's happening outside of Montana in this realm, because we have increasing conflicts and censorship and what's called cancel culture going on. I was just on a panel or a webinar this afternoon, sponsored by the American Alliance of Museums, and it was about this crisis, growing crisis. We're talking about culture wars all over again, and most of the museums on the call had already experienced, cancellation culture, where a trustee steps in and insists that something is removed from a show, or the museum itself decides that it can't handle exhibiting work that would perhaps incite violence. And for the sake of safety, they're canceling. A lot of this is centered on the, Palestinian and Israeli conflict. Palestinian artists are being censored across the board and canceled residencies, city residencies, artistic residencies, exhibitions are being canceled for Palestinian artists. They're being silenced. And a lot of that, so it's coming from all sides. And you know, book bans, I think, is still raging out there. But also the cancellation of school tours. You know, schools are taking it upon themselves. You know, we've seen the radical shift in political perspective on the school boards, and that follows through to, you know, things like the school tours. You know, they're canceling their tours to the museums. It's pretty radical. It has not happened here. I feel like could be a matter of time, you know, and I just wanted to mention there is an agency, it's called the National Coalition Against Censorship, and they have an arts and culture advisory program, and they're responding to these cases and responding with legal protection. And years ago, in the last cultural wars, I sat on the board for the National Campaign for Freedom of Expression, and that's essentially what we ended up doing was, you know, hiring, you know, lawyers to defend the NEA-4 and these artists who were being censored then by the legislature and by, at that time, it was a pretty narrowed, you know, situation. Now I feel like what's happening is across the board, a lot of different kinds of censorship and really the defeat of free expression is pretty broad.
Yeah. That's important.
Thank you for that
Sorry.
sobering
Sorry.
contribution. You know, I think I'm going to ask if there are questions people would like to ask of the panelists. Anyone?
Your last question referred to also the Seventh Amendment, and I'm not familiar with that.
The Seventh Amendment is the amendment in the Montana Constitution
Of
that grants
freedom of expression.
freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Interestingly enough, in the U.S. Constitution, they lumped freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of speech, and religion all in one amendment. And in the Montana Constitution, we have separate amendments for each of those.
Very smart.
Yeah, very smart.
Anyone else with a question? Okay, we're gonna hear from Leslie again.
I apologize, guys, that I can't help myself. I just want to urge you, if you have not seen the exhibit at the Brunswick, it's at 223 West Railroad. It's definitely worthwhile. It's a very short amount of time more. It ends on the 21st, which is a Saturday. We're going to have a small opening from 3 to 5. And at 4 o'clock, Craig Mentier will do a performance that is part of the exhibit. So I welcome you to that. The other thing is that there's been a lot of interest in this panel. I think it's spectacular, and it's just scratching the surface. But MCAT gave me a grant, and they are recording it. It will be on their channel, and I'll be able to post a link on the Brunswick Artists Facebook page, or you could call me, and I'll send you one once that is available. And I want to thank them. And I have to say, being part of the arts community is the best thing. And when I say arts, I mean a very, very broad brush. I have friends that are creative chefs. You know, yeah, it's not that you have to have a paintbrush in your hand, but I think we are very fortunate to be a member of that, and it's very imperative to the artists. That's part of the passion that I'm seeing in the show is we want to protect that opportunity. And I agree with Kamala Harris when she said it was Michelle Obama said, you have to do something. And so this is our area of expertise. Thank you.
That's cool.
And thank you all for being here.
Is that good?
Thank you, panelists.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you.